Are there any questions in here so far? So I think, yeah, when V2, I think that's going to be the biggest question. So I'll address that first. The big answer to that is, I don't know. But we're going to try and get it out as quickly as we can. We want to try and use the momentum that we've got. We've built up a community of people who really think that our idea is good, and we've got a little bit of money now that we can try and build something with, which is a luxury we didn't have for V1. So we're going to work as quickly as we can on V2. So the first thing for us to do was to reimburse everybody. We've done that. So now it's just about sitting down, putting our heads together and deciding what went well about V1 and what didn't go well. What were the things that could be improved upon, of which there are quite a few, and I'm sure I'll go into some specifics on those over the next hour or so. But we need to really figure out what should be in V2, because we've got a lot of ideas that we've been throwing around just casually amongst the team over the last 2 weeks as things were going well during the launch, and then as things started to not go so well, we've had ideas about what could be improved that we've spoken about, and many of those things probably will come to fruition at some point, but not all of them are going to make a V2. Some of them are probably going to be V4, V5, and other ones will make it into V2. But we want V2 to be as minimal as possible, that just fixes the core things that were broken in V1 so that we can get it out quickly. But obviously to a high standard, a lot higher standard than we held ourselves to V1. And yeah, we'll get that out and see where it goes from there. And then we can build upon that and build better things in the future, the V3s, the V4s, and these grand vision ideas that we have. But for us to build any of that grand vision stuff, we have to really nail the core mechanism. We can talk about some big ideas that we've got into the future, but all of them are prefaced on the idea that we have a functional protocol that can hold a peg. And I say hold a peg because the bigger vision for us is not to hold a dollar peg necessarily. It's at its core, Malt is a protocol that can hold a set point. And whatever we can get a reliable data feed of, we can hold that set point. So that in V1 and in V2 as well is just the dollar. It's a fixed value of 1. And we're just holding that peg. That's obviously the simplest thing for us to do. So when we're proving the core mechanism of the protocol, that's what we're doing. We're just using the simplest thing we can, and we'll progressively introduce complexity later. But that additional complexity can come from, well, we can peg to a data feed of the price of Matic or the price of ETH or the price of Bitcoin. That would be the next step. We can have other pools that are holding a dollar peg against a dynamic thing. And then from there, we can have something like a synthetic Bitcoin that tracks the value purely of Bitcoin. It's not holding a peg. At that point, it's not Malt, it's some other synthetic asset, but it's using the Malt protocol. And there's kind of a distinction there between Malt, the stablecoin, and the Malt protocol, which is just a protocol to control around a set point. And the possibilities are endless if we can nail a mechanism that can hold a set point using market incentives. Once we've got that, the world is quite literally our oyster. We can build whatever we can dream up. All we need is a data feed, and then we can just build it using the core incentive mechanisms of the protocol. But for us to get there, as I've said, we're going to have to nail the protocol. So we're going to keep things as simple as possible, and we're going to try and move quickly and get things out there and testing, because at the end of the day, we're only ever going to be able to get feedback on things when we put it out into the world. So it's the kind of the old adage in Silicon Valley: move fast and break things, fail fast. I think Malt very successfully failed fast on this occasion, and as difficult as that is for us to have to deal with in real time, it's a blessing overall, because it meant that we are allowed to build a V2 from scratch. Well, not from scratch, but we get to start from zero effectively with all of this new data and information that we gathered at V1. And we can just build a whole new protocol that is going to be 90+% the same as the old one, but with very significant improvements. Whereas if we didn't fail fast and we didn't have this bug, then we would just be limping along with a broken V1 or a subpar V1. And then we would have to hotfix and patch and provide additional maintenance to a V1 that isn't working as well as it should be. But in the way that it's actually panned out, we've able to completely nuke V1 and just relaunch a V2 with the improvements, which will allow it to be a lot cleaner and well architected in a way that it could never be if we were just doing hot fixes to V1. So in that sense, it's a blessing that we didn't have to do any of that stuff. So let's have a look through questions. Why didn't you run away with the money? I definitely would have. I mean, it wasn't my money. That's the be all and end all of that. It was the right thing to do, to give everyone their money back. At the end of the day, I wrote the bug. It wouldn't be right if I walked away with $13 million when I didn't do my job well. It doesn't seem like a good incentive, given that I've spent the last several months talking about incentives and well-aligned incentives, and I'd be a significant hypocrite if I had have espoused all of that and then just walked away with the money when everyone else who was supporting me lost money, and I, who didn't do my job well, walked away with 13 million. So I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. But I think something I mentioned in an article that came out in the Defiant is that it was kind of selfish in some way, because I want to build something cool. I've got a vision for a thing that I think can be really powerful, and it doesn't have to be Malt necessarily, but like this big vision of an idea of a crypto native stablecoin that's driven by market incentives, not by backed value. I think that's really powerful, and we have the power to do that in DeFi because it's all programmatic money, and that's something that's never existed before, and it's something that we as a community have the power to enact, and that's one of the coolest things I could ever imagine, and I want to be part of building that. And if I walked away with 13 million, I'm sacrificing my ability to ever work on that again, because if I ever tried to, then I'm just the guy who ran away with money before. Where if I give it all back, I've now got some legitimacy and some credibility that will selfishly allow me to continue working on this really cool thing. And over the long term, I might fail or I might succeed. If I fail, then I tried and I know. And if I succeed, it's probably going to be worth more than $13 million. So just like from a game theory standpoint, giving the money back also seemed optimal. So yeah, that's why I did it. 80,000% APR should be in V2. Yeah, we'll see. Seems unlikely though. I mean, I think the APRs will be high initially, just because there's a natural growth phase that any protocol goes through. If you invest in early stage startups, you're going to get massive growth, and that's just because you're buying something when it's tiny, and then you're getting to ride the growth. So in that sense, Malt will have high APRs, but a big problem that we had in V1 was that the APRs were so high, and it just sucked so much money in, and that was into a protocol that was untested at the time, at least untested with real money and real participants and real economic incentives. And that was obviously not the cause of the bug. The bug was the cause of the bug, and that was on me. But even without the bug, we would have struggled on the first auction, because I was hoping when we launched Malt. So for those who don't know, like Malt was basically me and people that I knew in real life, and a handful of other people in the Discord that had discovered it through via research and stuff. But it was very small. There was maybe 25 people who were regularly talking in the Discord, and then maybe 100 or 200 people peripherally when we first launched. And we had maybe $100,000 of TVL initially, based on the community offering that we gave out. And that was it. I didn't expect or foresee the kind of growth that we would see in Malt. I obviously thought Malt was a good idea, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But I thought we would have time to grow slowly, because nobody knew about it. So I just thought that we would grow organically over a long period of time, and we would have many iterations at the auction. So we would see an auction, and maybe the auction needs $10,000 of bids, and I would just bid the $10,000 myself just to see if it works, and it works, and then we go forward from there, and I tweak some parameters, maybe make the auction shorter or change liquidity extension percentage, and I can dynamically change these parameters over time. That was what I naively thought would happen. As it turned out, it didn't. We went to 60 million TVL, And the first time we ever saw an auction in Malt was off the top of that 60 million TVL into rumors of the bug, and that just caused like a big sell-off. And that would have been very difficult for the auction without the bug to handle, just because we didn't have the time to really tweak it well, and it wasn't optimized at all. The 30 minutes was way too long. As we discovered, we did shorten it, and that did help a little bit. The liquidity extension was way too low. We learned that, and so we would have struggled regardless. And yeah, like I said, we're now getting a chance to reset and try again with a fresh launch with all this newfound information, and that's like I said, a blessing. Can you explain what the benefit of being whitelisted for V2 is? You'll start earning yield from the moment we launch, whereas anybody who gets in, I'm not sure, I think I've spoken about this, but internally to Malt, there's epochs, which in V1 were 30 minutes long, and you would only start earning yield at the end of the current epoch that you bonded in. So if you bonded at, like if the epoch rolled over at 1 o'clock and you bonded at 15 minutes past 1, you would only start earning yield, or even have the possibility of earning yield, at half past the hour. And that meant that if you were if there was a whitelist situation there and you were bonded at the launch point, you could start earning yield because your bond was technically at time 0. So then into the first epoch, as the first epoch ticks over, which is immediately upon launch, you're eligible for rewards straight away. Whereas anybody else who isn't on the whitelist would bond at as soon as the launch happened, but that means they're bonding after the epoch started, which means they're only going to start earning yield at the start of the next epoch. So for anybody who gets in on the whitelist, you're going to have potentially 30 minutes of time, the first 30 minutes of launch, where only you're eligible for earning yield, and anybody who's not on the whitelist is not eligible for that. So that would be the main benefit of being whitelisted for V2. And it's also kind of, you can get in before launch whenever you have time, so you don't have to be sitting around at your computer come launch, and then you don't get front run by bots who are sniping the listing and sending the price high, and you don't get slippage if there's low TVL at the time or low liquidity in the pool. And there's various other kind of peripheral benefits to being on the whitelist in that sense. But we also we did a similar thing for V1, where we had this community offering where anybody in the Discord who'd used the testnets or been involved in discussion on the Discord could pledge $500 to the community offering, and then they got bonded immediately. And we'll probably do something similar for V2, but we need to iron out the details and be specific about how we're going to handle that. But one thing that we avoided doing for V1, and we will probably avoid doing for V2, is providing any massive amounts of benefit for the whitelist. We want the whitelist to get a benefit, of course, otherwise there's no point of having the whitelist. But it can't be a whitelist where you get like an instant 10x or an instant 100x or something, and anybody who's not on the whitelist is at a massive disadvantage. We want there to be a little bit of advantage to being on the whitelist, but not too much to make it not appealing to just enter in at market price when we launch. If subsidy will be reintroduced, for those who don't know, for the first day or so of V1, we had this subsidy option where you could reinvest, and the protocol would just give you the malt required to reinvest your DAI into LP. And we turned that off because there was a security vulnerability with that we discovered. And it seems unlikely that we'll bring that back, just because actually making that secure is going to be pretty difficult, and our engineering time is probably better spent elsewhere. Can you recap with how V1 failed and what steps the new protocol will take to avoid such an instance? So V1 failed because of, I think there was two issues, but really it was one. So it was the calculations in the earned function on the liquidity mine contract. That earned function was where pretty much all, I would say not pretty much, all of the bugs existed in that one function, in the way that things were calculated there. And there was two specific bugs, I think, that manifested in very similar ways. The first bug was related to people who'd bonded, unbonded, and then rebonded again. And when you unbond, you forfeit rewards. The unvested rewards that are coming for the next 24 hours get forfeited. And the amount that gets forfeited is based on the calculation in that earned function. And that earned function was miscalculating and returning a value that was slightly too high. And that meant that the amount that was being forfeited to the treasury was slightly too high. And ultimately that resulted in the contract running out of DAI. And then any other subsequent calculation that was required was looking up at how much DAI was there. There wasn't enough, and it would just crash. Subtraction overflow, because of it was trying to subtract off an amount of DAI that we didn't have, or subtract from that amount that we didn't have. So in V2, I mean, obviously we'll have better guards against ensuring that we're not like stating too much, that we do actually have enough DAI to do everything that we're trying to do. But we're also going to just completely rewrite the way that contract works. The way that the vesting rewards happens, that calculation was the most complex thing, and the way that we did it wasn't optimal by any stretch, and there was a lot of things that can be improved, and we've got a lot of good ideas on how to do that. So we're going to rip that apart and rebuild it, and make sure that we take care with how we make those calculations. And the plan that we've got to do that is probably going to be maybe 10x simpler in terms of the complexity of the code. And it will also be significantly cheaper in terms of gas, which on Polygon is not going to matter too much, but we want to be multi-chain in the future. So that's going to help with that. If we want to roll out on ETH, we don't want reinvesting or unbonding to be prohibitively expensive in terms of gas. So re-architecting that contract to be much more gas efficient while also being simpler is going to reduce the surface area of potential bugs, but it's also going to make us more future-proof when we decide to go multi-chain. Did V1 use Frax code like Iron did? No, it did not. It was completely written from scratch. It was a brand new mechanism, 90+% of which worked phenomenally well. The auctions worked okay. They did kind of return us to peg, but there was lots of issues with the auctions. And and then ultimately the bug is what undid us. But overall, I would say the mechanism at its core worked pretty well. The failure of the whole protocol was because of a bug, not because of a badly designed protocol, I would say. But the auction definitely has a lot of room for improvement. And yeah, we've got a lot of ideas around how we can go about improving it. But along the lines of Frax, I have spoken a little bit with the founder of Frax, and he's generally, I would say, a fan of Malt. He has some criticisms of Malt, which I think are well founded, and but he's a good guy, and he's been willing to help us out a little bit. So I'm sure there'll be some input in the future. Will there be a governance token or other long-term investment object in the project? Maybe, but probably not a governance token in the way that most projects have a governance token, just because I don't like the incentives around a governance token that is just a free-form, saleable, floating coin, because then it just incentivizes people to speculate on it, which in itself is not a bad thing. I think speculation is a good thing overall for markets, but when the users of a protocol are not accruing value, but the speculators are, then that becomes a problem. So there has to be some balance in between the two that we're going to have to reach. And I think that's an open question in DeFi. That's not just a Malt problem. That's a thing that I don't think DeFi generally has solved yet. So yeah, I'm happy to be part of the kind of the overall system of hive mind think in DeFi to try and solve that problem. And how do you do governance on chain in a way that's actually good? And yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, nobody's really done it well yet. More questions. Favorite Scotch. don't know, maybe Old Pulteney 12, or maybe an Aaron, I'm not sure. Are there other devs or others involved? Just support for Discord. So there's other devs on the periphery, but for the most part it's just been me. Most of the code written in Malt, front end, back end, UI design, marketing was all done by me up until launch, and then we have a team of like really great mods and people with like really strong ideas that have been like part of the team since launch, or maybe just before. And yeah, but the team is definitely going to grow now that we have a little bit of money. We try to be as fair with how much we kept, which is a criticism that we've seen floated around, that we kept money while everybody was losing. But the way that we've thought about it is, before the mass sell-off where the treasury ended up growing massively, there was about $2 million in the treasury and nobody had any issues with that. That was just general protocol revenue that went into the treasury, and people had no issue with that. And then we ballooned the treasury when everything sold off because of the forfeit mechanism, which that seems unfair that we would keep all of that because everyone was selling off because of the panic around the bug. And then we gave back all of that and 1.5 million of the money that was already in the treasury. So it seemed like a fair thing to us because we didn't want to keep more than we needed, and we don't think that we need that much, but we do need to hire some people. We need some other developers. We need some smart contract developers. We need some UI developers. We need some UI UX designers, some people to run like Twitter or other marketing. We need potentially like bug bounties. We obviously need audits, and audits are not cheap. So yeah, we try to keep as much as we needed to get the job done. And overall, if we do succeed in getting the job done, the people who are on a V2 whitelist are probably going to see some upside. So yeah, make of that what you will. Any ideas, objections to real-world use cases on the Malt stablecoin? There will definitely be real-world use cases. We're not going to be a stable farm forever. Like I said earlier, we did plan on having a bit more time to develop these things. We didn't expect the explosive growth in V1 that we saw, but we're actively working on partnerships, on relationships with other teams and projects, and with some out-of-the-box ideas on how we can get Malt to be a usable stablecoin rather than just one you hold because it's got a high APR. Because it's not going to have a high APR forever. The APR will come down to something more reasonable as the protocol matures. And if it does, then if the yield is the only thing people are staying for, then people are not going to stick around because there's going to be another farm that has higher APR. So we need utility. That's front and center to our long-term objectives, is to make Malt usable. And yeah, it just takes time, because ultimately a lot of projects who we could integrate or partner with, they want to see Malt prove stability. Otherwise they've got integration risk, because they integrate Malt and Malt fails. They have to bear the brunt of that as well, because they made the choice to partner with us. So they have to accept some responsibility in any losses that their users have faced. And a lot of these projects are just choosing, like, yeah, we like your idea, we like you guys, we think it's cool, we'd love to integrate, but we kind of want to see you demonstrate some stability over some time, not just like 24 hours. We want to see you being stable over weeks and months, and then we'll integrate with you. So then we're in a catch-22 situation where it's like, well, Malt can't just be a stable farm forever, like a degen yield farm forever, but we need utility. But to have utility, the other projects that want to integrate us need to see us be stable. So we're in a fight there, a constant like kind of creative tension between those two things, and it's on us to try and navigate that as well as we can. You said you had some ideas around front-running issues below peg. Yeah, we do. Probably not going to talk too much about those ideas right now, the specifics of them, because we haven't really ironed out the details and we're not sure which of them we're going to go with. But it's an issue that we're very aware of. That really held back the auctions. That was when the auction really started to kick in once we dropped it to 10 minutes and the thing started to work quite well. What we saw was we did start to lift the price towards peg, and I think we got up towards like 97, 98 cents or something like that. But we couldn't quite make it exactly back to peg, and a lot of that was because the front runners who were just swing trading it, they were front running the auction and then selling it after. They were just extracting so much of the value out of the liquidity extension. There was just that much sell pressure just below peg as these people were getting out that we couldn't feasibly reach peg again with the mechanics that we had. So it's definitely a big issue that we faced in V1, and we're aware of it, and we're doing our best to come up with good ideas on how to if not completely remove it, mitigate it as well as we can, or realign incentives, because ultimately if the bots that are front running are doing it because it's profitable, and there's an incentive to do it when it's profitable. But if we can give them another option that's more profitable with a significantly better or at least similar risk to reward profile, then that's going to be beneficial for us and beneficial for the bots involved as well. Like the front running thing was not as profitable in theory as the auction bids, because the way the auction works, you can actually buy at a lower price than you can in the open market. But the issue with that is the risk reward profile of both front running and being in the ARB auctions are a world apart. The front runners, if they're wrong on their swing trade, they can just get out at a loss and they can cut their losses. Where if you're in an ARB tokens, you're kind of stuck, and that means that there's a risk of going to zero, which is what we saw with Malt, and we've also seen that in other coins as well. So that's not a new phenomena in Malt. And yeah, we are aware of that, and we need to improve that. So we need to improve the risk to reward profile of being in ARB tokens. Just being more profitable than swing trading is not enough, because you're not looking for overall profitability, you're looking for expected value over time, and the risk to reward profile really changes the expected value of the ARB auctions, and yeah, we need to improve that. Can you talk about your coding experience? How long have you been working on Solidity? Any tips for people who are newish and learning Solidity? So my coding experience, without doxing myself, is reasonably extensive. I've worked in Silicon Valley, tech companies. I've worked for other startups. I'm currently CTO of a company, working in tech. So like I've got a lot of experience in tech generally. My experience in DeFi is limited at this point. Malt is my first proper DeFi project. So from that standpoint, my experience is not as in-depth as many other developers in this space. And I think I've had to learn very quickly about some of the specific nuances about what it is to run a DeFi project over the last 2 weeks or so. But I think I'm doing a reasonable job at learning. In terms of Solidity, I maybe first started learning Solidity in mid-2017, and then it's kind of been off and on since then. I've written some like little things here and there, but never anything as large as Malt. The Malt code base is by far the biggest Solidity project I've worked on. Any cap limit for whitelisted folks? Not sure yet. We probably will cap it just so that we don't end up with some like super crazy high TVL initially, kind of the issue that Faye ran into, where anybody who wanted in was already in and there was nobody left to buy, and there was just people who had tokens willing to sell. So that was a problem for them, and I don't want to run into that same problem. So there probably will be a cap, but we're going to have to work on the specifics of how that is, because we want to give as much benefit to the whitelist as possible without significantly diminishing the efficacy of the protocol. With Bitcoin tanking, seeing max pain across DeFi, do you think that would be a factor the team is considering when thinking on V2 launch dates? Probably. For anybody who was in since the start of Malt, will know that we actually delayed the launch of V1 because of these factors. When we were going to launch Malt, I think it was going to be about 3 or 4 days after the real big sell-off that we saw in Bitcoin and the whole crypto market. When that massive sell-off, like last month or whenever it was, we were going to launch then, like 3 or 4 days afterwards. And of course, that would have been a horrible place to launch because everyone was fearful. A lot of people had lost a lot of money, so there was a lot of people who wanted to invest in Malt that just didn't have the capital to do so anymore, and everyone was risk off anyway. So we did delay the launch. So that was something we were thinking about then, and if the same factors are at play for V2, then we'll consider delaying again. But we don't have a launch date right now, so we can't delay when we don't have a launch date, because we're working on the specifics of V2. But come closer to the time, if there was some reason that we thought that market conditions weren't good for launch, we would delay. If the auctions had succeeded and we reached peg, why wouldn't the protocol fail from the huge debt had to be paid back? That was a problem with V2, and that was, or V1, sorry, where we did accrue a lot of debt. And the whole point, I wrote about this before launch, was the cycle times between losing peg and regaining it from both above and below are really critical. And above peg, we had no problems there because we control minting malt. So we can just mint infinite amounts of malt if necessary and bring the price down. And so the reaction time of the protocol to an above peg deviation is hyper fast. No problems there. And then below peg, it's the auction thing. And because the parameters were not well tweaked, the auction was too long, the liquidity extension was not enough, and various other factors meant that the cycle time was really long. Plus, we had the big sell-off from the people who were fearful of the bug. So there was a lot of selling that wouldn't have normally have occurred, that was occurring because of that. And that just created a ton of sell pressure. We obviously fell a very long way, and the amount of debt that we had to accrue to get back to peg was huge. And then it would have taken some time to clear that. But if we had have reached peg and then confidence was like reestablished, 'cause it's hard to talk about it because there was so many conflating factors involved with the bug. Like if we assumed that there was no bug, we wouldn't have had so much sell pressure, probably. We would have seen a little bit as people were getting out, and we could potentially have regained peg, and then clearing that would have been easier. But if we just assume the kind of profits that we were generating in the first 24 hours when we were holding peg, the amounts of debt that we had have accrued through the whole auction process was like $7 million or something. We could have cleared that pretty fast with the kind of velocity that we saw in the first 24 hours, where we went from 100K TVL to 60 million in just over 24 hours. The amount of profit that was generated in that process was huge. And clearing 7 million of debt wouldn't have been difficult. But but as it turned out, it was actually very difficult for us to do that, and that's why we turned everything off, because it was very obvious to us from fairly early on that when we lost peg the second time, when we kind of regained peg just under it and then we started selling off again, we kind of knew that it was over. The bugs at that point, we weren't aware of how bad they were. We thought they were quite isolated, and that we could potentially deploy a new liquidity mine with the fixes and migrate everyone, and then maybe just compensate the people who were locked at the time, which we thought were a very small percentage. But as it turned out, that wasn't the case. But we knew that the auctions had accrued too much debt, so we kind of just shut the thing down to stop people putting more and more money into the auctions and just like ballooning the amount of money that we ultimately would have had to pay back. And we're kind of fortunate that we did. I mean, we would have liked to have paid everybody back 100% of their cost basis, but as it turned out, we just didn't have enough money, so we did the best we could. But we would have definitely had more to pay back if we didn't shut down the auctions. Ever consider expanding to have another way to earn yield through lockups on DAI and increase the pool of funds to support critical moments of the protocol? We've thought about that, and I think these kind of additional peripheral incentives and peripheral like structures within the protocol are really interesting, and I think there's definitely something there. But for V1, we didn't add any of that because we wanted to keep it down to the minimum core protocol. And we did have plans for a V2 even before launch, which was to implement something that we were calling the Malt Fund, which would have been a kind of an automated system that auto-compounded and participated in auctions based on your risk preferences. But yeah, as it turned out, we didn't get to that because of the various things that have happened, and then we've had to change course. And the new V2, it looks different because of the new information that we have. But yeah, I do think that over the long term, we will have these kind of peripheral things happening. And we also want to encourage other people to build around Malt. We want it to be community driven. So while we are working on the core protocol, we want other people and other developers and other teams and other projects to build cool stuff around it, because the idea that we as a team, like the however many ends up in the team and like in the core dev team, let's say there's like 5 or 6 of us, the idea that we are the 5 or 6 best people, best positioned to come up with the best possible ideas for Malt is just kind of ridiculous. Like there's a lot of people in DeFi who are really smart, and the chances of one of them having a better idea than what the 5 of us can come up with seems really high. So we want to encourage people to build, and sometimes people build like super amazing stuff, and that might not be us. And if it's other people, but they're doing it in the pursuit of the same goal as us, and they're doing it tangential to Malt, then we can make that part of the protocol, and they can join the team if they want to, or they can continue building it on their own and just do super cool stuff. Can we open up a new chat for suggestions, discussions for improvements? Yeah, I think we will. I think that's a good idea. I'll set that up after the call. I read that you're considering an airdrop for the whitelist. Can you comment? I mean, we airdropped 13 million DAI, if that's what you're talking about. In terms of an airdrop for V2 Malt token, we've not said anything about that, and we have no specific plans. I mean, it's not out of the question that we do that, but it's not something that we've settled on at all. That's very much something we'll consider closer to the time once we've actually solved what V2 is going to be. Incredibly high APRs lead to insane APEs and then insane FUD. Are APRs that are too high potentially bad for Malt V2? Yes. Categorically, I think that's true. And there's an interesting, I think, curve that you can draw where 0 APR attracts nobody, and then as you start increasing the APR, you start to increase more and more, or attract more and more people. And then as you start to get to 3-figure APRs, you're going to like see a massive exponential run up in the amount of people who get attracted into that protocol. And then I think you'll hit some peak of maximal adoption at some level. I'm not sure what it is. Let's hypothetically say it's like 5,000% APR. And then after that, I think you see a drop off, especially in the current climate where like there was the Malt blow up, there was the Iron Titan blow up, and people are wary of super high APRs because they're not sustainable, and they quite often lead to the insane like FUD that happens, and the apes just driving it to like they don't understand the protocol, and they're just getting in for a couple hours and getting out, and that kind of thing definitely affects the sustainability of a protocol, and it makes it difficult to recover from. But that's not to say that high APRs are bad, obviously. And as we have to try and draw a balance between a high enough APR to make it really attractive to be involved and to increase TVL and to grow a community and to do all the things that we want to do, without making it so high that it becomes scary for people to get involved, or it simply becomes so profitable to just try and like work around it or something. Can you publish and verify all Malt contracts for V2? Yes, we will. The reason we didn't for V1 is because we were in discussions with audit companies. As it turned out, we needed them sooner than we could get them, and that was on us. We should have done that earlier. The reason we didn't is we were trying to bootstrap the project from zero, and we explicitly declined external funding because we didn't want to give up control, because we wanted it to be a community project. We thought that we would be able to launch small, stealth, grow slowly, get an audit, and then kind of go from there. As it turned out, that wasn't to be. But our ultimate plan has always been to open source all the code and let anybody use it. But we didn't quite get around to that. Are there any plans to drip rewards over a longer period plus change the size of liquidity extension? Probably and yes. We're definitely changing the size of the liquidity extension. We're talking about ideas of like maybe making that dynamic in relation to various things like total TVL, growth, like speed of growth of TVL, like the rate of change of the TVL, and like how long it's been since the last auction, and various factors like that can go into some kind of algorithm that decides what the optimal liquidity extension should be in that given moment, given those parameters. I think that's an interesting idea. And drip rewards over a longer period, yeah, we've considered that, and we're throwing ideas around how to do that. But that's a complicated thing. We can't just, we could just increase the vesting period, but there's also other things we can do that are not just making the vesting period longer. And some of those other things have interesting ramifications that if we decide that some of those ideas are good, we'll talk about them publicly and get some community feedback on them. But yeah, it's definitely on the table. Can you add a night mode to V2? Yeah, sure. I like night mode. I'm actually, ironically, I always use dark mode with things, so it was kind of funny that Malt didn't have a dark mode. The V2 code can be open source. Yes, already answered that, but I'll answer it again. Why have ARB tokens when you can have ARB profits go to LP holders? Because we need supply contraction, I think. The point of the ARB auctions is that you get aggressive supply contraction when you're under peg. I think if you're distributing a lot of profits to LPs when you're under peg, you can run into issues probably. There might be some way to do that. If we can come up with a way of getting really nice supply contraction under peg while also paying LPs some profit and get everything working harmoniously, then yeah, sure, that's better than what we've got. But as of yet, we haven't come up with an idea that satisfies everything that we need. Will there be V2 testnets? Yes, for sure. There will be. And hopefully, there's kind of a thing that's been brought up a lot, that we said that we had testnets for V1, and we did. They ran for months, and yeah, we still failed catastrophically. So why was that the case? And I think ultimately the case that was just my fault, because the team wasn't big enough. We didn't have enough eyes on the project, and the testnets were not big enough either. We didn't have a big enough community, so the amount of stress that we could put on the testnet was pretty small overall, where if we had 3,000 people like constantly hitting it on the testnet, and then we could have found the edge cases and found these weird like little issues that cropped up, but because we only had maybe 30 people consistently using it, we just weren't able to find the edge cases. And when we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where we had thousands of people and 60 million TVL, we found those edge cases pretty quickly. If APRs are non-existent while debt is being paid off, how is that not a guaranteed TVL halt? APR is not, like in the V1 design, there would be APR while we're paying off the debt. It would just be smaller. And the amount smaller was like a parameter that we can tweak. So there would have been, because that was a concern, that if there's zero incentive to be an LP while there's debt in the protocol, then people are just going to pull their LP, go elsewhere and come back, potentially when the APR returns. So we didn't want that. The compromise that we had is that the APR just drops over that period of time. I don't think that was optimal either. There's definitely a better way to do that. And yeah, those are part of the ideas that we're throwing around for V2, is how do we keep LPs incentivized to stay in when we're paying off debt? And potentially, is there a way to have no debt anyway? If that's possible, then that's better as well. And I mean, that's kind of the exciting thing. And that's one of the things that we're most excited about with the community, is that there's a lot of really smart people in this community. There's a lot of people who've been in other stablecoins and they've got great ideas about stablecoins. And there's other people who've never been in stablecoins and also happen to have really great novel insight, because they're not kind of shadowed by their existing knowledge of stablecoins and they're coming at it from a fresh perspective. So it would be remiss of us to not want to consider all of these options that people are bringing to the table, and somebody is going to bring us like a game-changing ideas one day. And yeah, when that happens, we're just going to implement it because it's better than anything we came up with. Because at the end of the day, we're not in this for ego. Like, we don't want to build the thing just because it's us building it. Like, we want to build something that's really cool for DeFi. And I've said this before, that if Malt ends up failing and somebody else ends up building something from the ashes of Malt, it takes the best parts of Malt and improves on it, then I would still consider that a personal success, that I had some role in the development of the ultimately successful stablecoin, even if that ends up not being Malt. It's just cool to be part of that journey. And yeah, everyone in the community is part of that journey with us, and it's a collaborative thing between all of us. We happen to be the ones writing the code and deploying it, but that doesn't mean we have to be the ones coming up with the ideas. We can just take the knowledge that we have of the protocol and triage the ideas from the community and parse out the best ones and implement those. And sometimes we have good ideas too. So yeah, it's all a big collaboration. How do we modify our UI to communicate these things better to our users and prevent panic and bank runs? I think that's a hard problem to solve, and that's why we want to use some of our treasury to hire like a really strong UX person, somebody who really understands how to build strong user experiences in a way that communicates things in a timely fashion, but without being overwhelming, like the progressive disclosure of complexity to the user. So you're not just like, it's not one big UI with everything, but you're kind of inferring user intent and trying to disclose as much complexity as is necessary for their intent at the given moment. That's a really hard thing to do. And I would argue that like Silicon Valley tech has made an industry out of that. It's just removing friction from user experience. That's entirely what like the Apples, the Googles of the world do. They take user experiences that are hard and they figure out how to do them really well. And then they condense it and remove friction, and eventually you end up with a really polished product that's just great. And yeah, if it was easy, everyone would do it, but it's not. So we need to hire some really good people. We need some talented UX people. As someone from Silicon Valley, can you talk about why you chose to stay anon compared to use your status and identity? Some embrace anon with DeFi and others use credentials to boost their protocol and prove legitimacy. Thanks. I think, yeah, there's definitely a sense of like you can use who you are in like who your real identity is to bring legitimacy to the table. But ultimately for the protocol to be successful, that's not enough. And I would much rather start from zero and let the protocol prove itself and then become legitimate and stand on its own 2 feet than to rely on a name behind it. Not that my name is going to be particularly useful anyway, but the idea is that I wanted Malt to be community driven, and having an anonymous lead on a community driven project is beneficial for the project overall, I would say, because if there's a known person who's like they're just like a well-respected name in the industry and they're the leader, then they're the one that everyone looks to all the time, and they become the de facto figurehead of the project. And I didn't want that for Malt. I wanted Malt to be seen as just a project on its own, and being anonymous seemed like the best way to do that. But also another thing that you see a lot in DeFi is that anonymous also means uncommunicative. That it's like, I'm not going to reveal my identity, therefore I'm not going to reveal anything about me. I'm not going to have a personality. I'm not going to be a community facing person. And I think that's a mistake. I think I I want to be somebody who engages with the community and who takes feedback from the community and is somebody that the community feels like they can communicate with and be part of the journey with, because that's ultimately how we're going to build something great. But that doesn't mean that you need to know exactly everything about who I am or use my credentials and legitimacy in the real world to bring credentials and legitimacy to Malt. Malt should be legitimate in its own right. Who came up with the name Malt and why Malt was decided as the name of the protocol? It was quite whimsical. I needed a name for the side project I was working on, and I happened to be drinking a glass of whiskey at the time, so I called it Malt. That was it. What would you have done differently if you could? It's a good question. I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of philosophy involved in that question, I think, because doing something differently assumes that I don't like the outcome that we got. And while I don't like the outcome necessarily for V1, I would have, like, in an ideal world, it just goes super well, but it didn't. But I think we actually got a better outcome because we now have a platform to build from and a community, and we've got some hype around the project and people are talking about it, and that's an opportunity for us to seize now. So I kind of don't want to change anything. So maybe I wouldn't have done anything differently. But there's definitely things in V1 that I'm going to change for V2. So in that sense, I would have done those things differently. And I've spoken about those things, auctions and liquidity extension, various other mechanisms. How much do audits cost? Generally, it depends on the complexity of the code base, but anywhere between like $50,000 and $100,000 for a competent audit, I would say. What's the point of pegging Malt to DAI when DAI is already an algorithmic stable? Is that ultimately tying up more collateral in stables? Well, I would define algorithmic slightly differently. DAI is a collateralized, over-collateralized stablecoin. Malt was trying to be algorithmic in that it's not collateralized, and at least not in the same way, just backed by value and uses market incentives. But also, Malt DAI is just a convenience initially. Ultimately, there will be Malt ETH, Malt Matic, Malt Bitcoin or Malt Wrap Bitcoin, Malt Yearn, like Wi-Fi, I don't know. It's going to be Malt pairs for all sorts of things. DAI was just a highly liquid stablecoin that everyone seems to know about already and doesn't have some of the issues that like USDC custodial type Tether issues. DAI has its own issues, but seemed like a reasonably decent one to start with to keep the complexity low. But yeah, ultimately, Malt will not just be paired with DAI, and it also won't just be pegged to the dollar, the US dollar. Over the long term, Malt can be pegged to whatever we want, and that's one of the big insights of Malt. Malt's just a protocol that can control to a set point. The set point right now is 1, but it can be the price of ETH. It could be the 60-day moving average of Bitcoin. It could be whatever we want. And yeah, there's a lot of scope for interesting pegs that are like just stablecoin pegs to maybe a crypto native CPI that tracks inflation. So you have an inflation hedge in a stablecoin. That's a really cool idea. I think probably the most powerful idea in DeFi if somebody can pull that off. And I know Frax are working on it and some other stablecoins are working on it. I think that's a really cool thing. But also there's interesting applications of the Malt protocol to like synthetic assets. I know like some core members of our community have spoken about the usefulness of the Malt mechanism as a way of creating synthetic assets. So, and anything that we can have a data feed on, we could create a synthetic asset of with using the Malt incentives. So yeah, long term, that's a super interesting thing to look after. Testnets with incentives will bring more testers. Yeah, that's true. Not sure how to fairly incentivize though, but if we can come up with an idea, maybe that's something we do. Any lessons your team could learn from the blow up of Iron and Titan? I think it's an interesting one that there's a lot to be learned from that. I think Personally, the thing that I learned most from Iron is how well we handled the situation with our community, because I was stressing a lot that we were not communicating well enough, that we weren't communicating frequently enough, that we weren't giving people enough information, and I was wrestling with all of that the whole time and trying to solve the problems as well, and that was difficult. And only after the fact, when the dust had settled and I was able to take a step back and have a look at what we did, I realized we did it quite well. And then I saw Iron implode, and I realized that we handled it really well. So I think that's the biggest thing that I personally learned from that. But in terms of specific stablecoin mechanics, I don't think there's much to say. Like, the Iron mechanism works pretty well generally because it's just fracks, and fracks are pretty good. They've held peg for a long time. Iron just did it slightly differently and it didn't work. Why not have LP payout automatically go to the auction during the auction? Yeah, we've thought about that as well. I think it's an interesting idea. Have you considered adding NFTs to Malt in order as a tool to maintain peg? No, not to maintain peg, but I do kind of want to find an artist. If I can find a really good artist, I want to get them to do some NFTs for Malt and just like airdrop them to people who are involved in V1. I think that'd be really cool. Maybe for like significant things to happen in V1 as well. Like the first ever ARB token pledge, like that user, whoever that was, gets an NFT that represents that, and whoever was the first to buy on the open market, or probably not that because it was probably bots, but various firsts, and also just like I bought ARB tokens, or I survived Malt V1, or whatever else. I think there's a lot of cool stuff there, and to kind of just make light of the situation. If we can't laugh about it, what can we do? And I just think it'd be cool as a keepsake, a memento for people, and on the off chance Malt actually does go on to do something really great, then those NFTs might be worth something, and maybe that's how we reimburse people. Will the new UI be previewed for us so we can provide feedback? Yes, for sure. We'll have that live. The testnet will the testnet will run with the UI that we're working on at the time. So it's not just a testnet of the contracts, it's a testnet of the UI as well. That's how V1 worked, and that's how V2 will work. And hopefully we'll get some good feedback and really build something like a UI that's actually really great, not just like cobbled together by somebody who is very much not a designer. Moving price averages should not be 10 minutes as on Polygon, since transactions are way quicker. ARB could see issues again in the future. Can this be modified? I'm assuming that means the auction length, or maybe the TWAP of the moving average of the price. Either way, yes, both can be modified, and they probably will be. Can you announce how, when we can help the testnets? Yes, we will definitely announce that before they happen, while they're happening, and all sorts. Like, we want as many people as possible to help us out with the testnets, because we don't want to happen with V2 what happened with V1. We're going to be a lot more careful, we're going to be a lot more rigorous, and we hope that the community wants to help as well, because it's in the best interest of the community anyway. If everyone helps out with V2, then we all benefit, because if we can nail V2, we're all in early on something that could be like a really great protocol, and that's good for us all if we can nail it. Will it be Malt V2, or is it better to rebrand? It will be Malt. I don't think we're changing that. V2, maybe we give it a better name, but I think we've built too much brand recognition around the concept of Malt for us to just like throw that all away and just arbitrarily rebrand. I think the brand image can change. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be what it is right now, but the name will remain Malt. A follow-up to the question about using DAI, I assume, as a pair, as my point being that maybe a different coin should be used initially. Maybe, but I think whatever we use, it has to be a stable coin. Otherwise, it introduces too much initial complexity. Trying to hold a dollar peg against something that's floating in value adds another variable to the complexity, and if we can't guarantee that all the rest of the code works with the simplest case, then we're not going to add arbitrary complexity just because we need to make sure that we can actually hold a stable peg to something static, and then we can start adding other assets. But in terms of other stable coins, yeah, we could use DAI, USDC, Frax, Tether, whatever. None of that really matters as long as it's a stable coin. Who was the biggest ape you had to pay back this week? I don't know. I mean, I don't know everyone's addresses, and I'm not even actually sure what the largest amount we paid back was. I was very much relying on the process of calculating the cost basis for everyone, and I couldn't go through every individual, so I just did the calculations across everyone in the same way. Everyone was treated the same way, and then from there it was, if we were wrong in any case, then we were just hopeful that people would come to us with the corrections. Then we could check those individually and see if they were wrong or right, and if they were wrong, we'd make changes, and that's what happened. And I think in the end we got pretty close. Like most people who came to us for a second look at our calculation, we were right. The calculation was in fact right, and we could provide evidence of that. There were a few edge cases where we were wrong, things that we hadn't accounted for, and we updated the code accordingly and paid people out. What oracle do you use for price feeds? Would a live feed like Chainlink be more beneficial than a TWAP? Yes, but it depends on what we're doing. I've spoken with Chainlink. I've got a contact at Chainlink that I've spoken to a few times, and still have like an active Telegram group with them if I ever needed any assistance from them. And I do long term want to use Chainlink. They've been very helpful, and I think it is a lot more beneficial than just a straight TWAP from the AMM. But that's like when we're pegging to the dollar, it doesn't matter. We don't need an accurate price feed because we're just pegging to $1. Like we know what the price is in the AMM pool, and we just track a TWAP of that to know the overall price. When malt is in multiple pools, knowing what the global market price of malt is, then that's where Chainlink becomes useful. But if we're only in a malt die pool, then the TWAP is the price. Just smooth that a bit. Is it true that you're thinking about finishing the reimbursements for lock guys with V2 tokens? I can't say that that's true or untrue. We haven't spoken about that internally to any degree. It's obviously been mentioned, but we haven't made any decisions on how that's going to be handled. So if there's any rumors around that, they're mostly false, probably. At least they're not coming from us. Cool. Is there any other questions? Can I go into the malt chat? I don't really know how this works, but I'm hoping that we've done it okay with the question channel. Obviously not done a super good job of monitoring the actual voice channel to see if anybody's raised their hand, but hopefully I've got to everybody's questions. Did you read up on any theory on fractional banking before this project? Nothing specifically for this project, but I've done a fair amount of reading about various things that are tangentially related to like economic theory, auction theory, game theory, fractional banking. I've read a fair amount about that, which is kind of why I came to build Malt in the first place, because I mean, I've been in tech. That's always been that's my career. That's my passion. It's what I love. I love technology. I love building stuff. I have done ever since I was a kid. So I always wanted to build stuff. And then over the years, I picked up various skills and various interests that were not specifically technically related. And all of them kind of came together for Malt. It was almost like the clouds parted and the gods presented me with an idea, which was Malt in the end. So I had interest in game theory. I had interest in like more specifically auction theory and just economics and incentive structures, and not just like theoretical game theory. I played a lot of poker. I actually played poker professionally for a period of time. And anybody who follows poker, like there's a whole school of thought in poker called game theoretically optimal play, where you try and calculate the exact correct play mathematically, game theoretically. Not actually possible to calculate given the complexity of the game, but it's a goal that people are going for. And when you play that for a long time, you end up building up a decent intuition for game theory, and I had that, and all of like my knowledge of trading and crypto and tech and game theory, it all came together in one idea for Malt, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. I kind of feel like this is my calling. This is what I was meant to do. Like everything I've ever read about in my entire life has come together into one idea. So while I've maybe not executed on it as well as I'd like to on the first attempt, I mean, there's plenty of people who believe that it's a good enough idea that I'm going to get another chance, and hopefully we're going to build something great. What's the timeline itinerary for the next month or so? The immediate itinerary is that we need to figure out who or what roles we need to hire for, and then sit down and actually calculate what are going to be the features that end up in V2 versus what are going to be features of not V2. And so that's our immediate priority, is to sit down, work out who we need to hire and who we can afford to hire based on the amount of money that we've got, and then what ideas do we need to implement soon rather than later. What can we do to help out Malt V2? I mean, Horizon, I know that you've reached out to me, and I'll probably ping you again about any technical know-how that you have. But other than that, if anybody's got any skill sets that would be useful, you can reach out to us and we can see if there's something that could be done. And that's so that'd be UI designers, UX people, ideas people, developers, front-end developers. Our UI is going to be in React, so anybody proficient in React. Solidity developers, I mean, that's obviously the core of what we need, is like a good team of Solidity developers. Anybody who's marketing, understands marketing, memes. If you understand memes, I think that's a big thing that we're going to need. Social media people. All of these things are useful. We just don't know. We just don't know who we can afford, what we can afford, and where our money is going to be best spent. Because we don't have $13 million anymore, so we're going to have to be frugal with how we spend it. Make sure we spend it in the right place. So as much as I'd like to spend like $20 million on like building the dankest memes that the world has ever seen, it's probably not the most prudent use of our money. You were there when React was invented, like in the same room, or you were just around? So if it was just around, so was I. I remember it was exciting days. I was working in an Angular shop at the time, actually, although mostly doing back-end work. But I remember trying to hack on React in the evenings and realizing it was profoundly better than what we were using day to day. You can get community investment to avoid VC governance and remaining community driven. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If we need additional funding, we'll probably try and come up with some way of raising capital from the community as opposed to accepting VC money. I'm not opposed to VC money generally. I think VCs have a really strong role in the world of tech. And I mean, there's many mega successful companies that would not be nearly as successful as they are had it not been for the VCs that back them. But I think for crypto, especially these kind of grassroots community-driven projects, VCs are not the answer. And I mean, that's why I turned down a lot of VC money while I was scouting out the world for Malt, which in hindsight maybe was a bad choice, because we could have got audits done if I had have accepted VC money, and then we may not have run into all of these issues. But I think that was the sacrifice I was willing to make to keep this grassroots as much as possible. Apologies for being late, but how had the issues with the ARB auctions changed your strategies for retaining PEG? Will you relaunch your modified ARB auction strategy or develop a new strategy? We've toyed with the idea of both. I think we're probably going to have some kind of auction still, just because, I mean, I think it's a strong idea. I think the way that we actually handled it could have been a lot better, but we did learn a lot, so I think we can make it a lot better. But yeah, there's also a possibility we just develop something new. But the problem with that is if we develop something new, then we're not really necessarily learning from our mistakes. We're just building something new, and there may be mistakes in that, and then V2 might fail just as catastrophically. So yeah, probably stick with the auction, but just improve it a lot. Thoughts on AMMs? I mean, profound revolution, but I mean, maybe you're meaning specifically as it relates to Malt. I actually really like the idea of Malt AMMs, like an AMM built around Malt. I think that's really cool. It gives Malt immediate utility, because if there was, like hypothetically, I'm not saying we're going to do this at all, this is just me spitballing at this point, but if there was a Malt AMM, then traders don't have to pay fees, because LPs are already getting paid a lot from the arbitrage that the protocol does on itself. So while every other AMM has to charge traders fees to pay their LPs, it's the only way they can pay their LPs. If Malt had an AMM, we wouldn't have to do that. So trading could be free for traders. That's a huge utility. So then Malt immediately becomes the coin that you need to hold, the stable coin that's worth holding purely because it's the one that you get free trading fees when you on your trades. That's like an immediate utility that we can control unilaterally. But also building AMMs is really hard, and building stable coins is really hard, and trying to build a stable coin and an AMM at the same time is like hard squared, and maybe that's not a route we want to go. But it's potential that we could partner with an AMM project that's building an AMM and get a tight integration, so that we can actually control the arbitrage of Malt at the protocol level inside the AMM. So as the trade is happening, we're arbing it, so that we can potentially even reduce slippage in those cases, or at least if we, like the way that Malt works currently is you buy on the AMM, you get slipped, and then the protocol arbs your slippage effectively, and then pays that profit from that arbitrage to LPs. But if in that the order of events there is that the trade happens and then the arbitrage happens, but you can actually do the arbitrage ahead of the trade. It's kind of like a flash loan arbitrage. And then the slippage that the user experiences is actually, instead of from $1 being slipped from $1 to $1.02, they're slipped from 98 cents to $1, because of the way that the pool was constructed before their trade executed. And that's because we were able to mint the Malt into the pool before their trade executed. So their slippage is in their favor at that point. They're actually getting a better price, and we're still able to arb it. I mean, that's a possibility, but I mean, again, I don't even know if that's possible because I've not thought about it too much because I'm just spitballing, but maybe that's something. I think it's a cool idea worth exploring, but no, it's not a V2 idea for sure. If Malt goals include being able to peg to more than just $1, what's the difference between holding Malt versus a pegged currency? Seems like the same thing with extra steps. Can you elaborate on that? I don't think I fully understand what you mean. Please talk more about future possible utility of Malt. Hard for me to speculate on that, because there's such a world of possibility of the kind of use cases that we could have for Malt. I mean, in a fully realized like vision of what I hope for Malt, then Malt is basically just like the M1, M2 monetary supply, and the utility is money. It's like anything you can do with money is what you can do with malt. Realistically, that's probably not going to happen, but I think if we aim for that, we're probably going to build something really cool. But yeah, in the short term, I think probably lending, be used as collateral in like trading platforms, options platforms, that kind of thing. And then, I mean, like the AMM idea where you can get feeless trading if you hold malt, that kind of thing. Cool. Well, anyway, I think been on for like an hour and 20 minutes at this point. So I think for anybody who's late and missed it, we've recorded it, so you can we'll put it up online somewhere and you can listen to it back. And yeah, I mean, obviously if you watch it and you still have any questions, you can pop into the Discord and tag me or the mods or something, and we can answer your question in the chat. But otherwise, thank you to everyone who's turned up and asked questions. It's been fun. And yeah, I'll try to do this more frequently. Maybe once a week. We'll see. But I think, yeah, we'll probably get better at it as well. I think give us feedback on how this worked, how it went. I think the chat channel for questions, maybe that was good. If you think there's a better way to do it, let us know, and we can improve it for the next time. Or maybe people prefer, like, maybe we do like Clubhouse calls or something like that instead of doing it in Discord. We're open to all those possibilities. Although I think if we go the Clubhouse route, somebody will have to send me an invite for my 0xScotch because I don't want to dox myself. But yeah, but I'm happy with Discord. But yeah, just let us know what everyone thinks and we can go from there.